up? Welcome. Does this work? Michael, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Everybody in the chat, can you hear us okay? Both of us?
Hello.
I'm going to do something so that people can see me. I know that you prefer not to, so
Yeah.
go ahead and I'll carry this with my face.
You are the face of these streams.
There we go. Yeah, actually, speaking of the face, I just finished Totality and Infinity in that group that I was discussing it in. So,
How long have you guys been doing that?
no, I mean, we haven't been consistent about meeting every week or anything like that, but I mean, it's been going on for like 3 months, you know?
Someone says I sound echoey.
All right. I don't think.
What about now?
How about now? Was that better, folks?
Is that any better, everybody? Maybe I should not use this microphone.
Michael is echoing. Echo for Michael. Yeah, everybody's saying it. Fuck. We need a faster response rate here from the crowd. Nah, still doubled. Okay. Well,
All right, hold on. What about now?
No, I think that this must be something on my end, Michael. This must not be your fault.
Nope.
All right. Let's try to figure out what that could be then. Well, folks, welcome to this stream. We're a little rusty here. We're gonna have this figured out in just a second, though. I think I might know what to do. Let's see. Let's go about 3, 6.
Now.
Well, now you should be able to hear me again. Now you can
I can hear you.
But now you're still doubled. This is the problem. Folks, we might have a problem. I'm trying to figure out what the solution will be if we can't get you undoubled here.
We restart the call.
See, I don't think that that's the issue. All right, just talk again.
I am talking just to talk, just to see if I'm not doubled.
Yeah, folks, is it not doubled anymore? Are we fixed? This is ridiculous. Are we still doubled? I'm thinking we're probably still doubled. I don't know what to do now. Yeah, if people in the chat in a second here, because it takes a second to get to space and back. Still double. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and hang up and call me. I'll call you right back.
No, let me call you. I'll call you because it goes to my phone.
Okay.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, bye. Yeah, well, he said he'd call me, so what am I even doing? Well, chat, if we can get this working, I'm really excited. This is going to be a great conversation, but we'll see. We'll see in a second here.
Can you hear me?
I mean, I can hear you just fine. You're not doubled for me, which is what's weird about this whole thing.
Well, can they hear us now? See if they said the ringing is doubled.
The ringing is even doubled. Oh, jeez. Double trouble. The ringing sound was doubled. I just can't for the life of me.
Oh, wait, somebody says it sounds fine now.
Not doubled!
Sweet.
All right. Perfectly audible now.
Right.
we will
Not messed with
timestamp.
anything.
Okay, we're not touching shit now.
Fuck that.
Count our lucky stars. Now, you're a little quiet on my end, but I think you're probably fine on theirs. I just want to make sure everyone the voice levels between myself and Michael more or less equal for you all. The reason we're drawing this sound check stuff out is because we are rusty, and the guy that we pay to do all of our sound stuff for us never got paid. And we never even hired him. And so now we just don't have anyone doing it. And so it's just me.
We're fucked.
We're just fucked.
Hey, what's up, James?
Who we got in the chat here? We got Dank Audio Stash. Got Ann Snellgrove moderating. Thank you. And
James is one of my long-time Facebook friends.
Great. And I think we've got a bunch of other people who will be probably trickling in here now that we're actually going.
Yeah.
So let me.
Well, this is all your fault because you're the one who got me to watch Squid Game.
Hey, it's my fault. Okay, so let's start with that. So there's a few different kinds of people here in the chat, everybody. There are people who have watched Squid Game. There are people who have not watched Squid Game. There are people who know Lacan. There are people who don't know Lacan. There are people who hate spoilers but have seen it. And there are people who hate spoilers who need to leave. Because the first thing we're probably going to do is jump into talking about this. So
you don't want spoilers, get the fuck out.
Get the fuck out of here.
Not the spot for you.
Yeah, if you're on my email list, you had sufficient and ample warning. And I did try to give everybody time. And so, actually, I was just talking to Brian today, and he's like, yeah, well, I watched Squid Game because I got that email. And so he's ready
really?
now. Yeah, he wants to watch this. I don't think he's joining us tonight, but he's stoked to watch it like tomorrow, he said. So
Sweet. Hi, Brian.
Yeah. Okay, so so folks in the chat, which kind of person are you on that whole, let's say, we've got the Lacan or no Lacan, Squid Game, no Squid Game. If you've seen it, are you excited, so get that going. So yeah, when I started watching it because it had just come out and I happened to be in front of a TV and I was like, well, I'm just going to watch the pilot because it looks kind of cool. Just the aesthetic looked cool. And so I clicked on it. And I got really intrigued, and but then the second episode is when I sent Michael the screenshot of the I guess they're searching someone's room, someone who's been missing, and there's this book on the desk, and across the top of the screen it says Theory of Desire, Jacques Lacan, and I was like, what? What? And then the rest of the show I watched, and of course I sent that to Michael. And then the rest of the show I was just thinking, an intellectual show. We're not just a gore fest. We're actually intellectual. And so they just put it there because there was also like Nietzsche and a couple other kinds, Van Gogh and other kinds of books on that. So I'm like, maybe this is just kind of like a pretentious, like, social signal-y thing for people who went to a university, at some liberal arts college. And so I'm watching it trying to think, am I reading Lacan into this or is this a Lacanian show? And so I've brought on our local expert to talk about that. Welcome, Michael.
Hello. No, like I say, I'm so busy with work and trying to write my main book that I wasn't going to watch Squid Game, and you kept bugging me about it, and thanks to you.
A small book. Yeah. And
yeah.
And it's one that you threw together pretty quick. I mean, the show only came out a little while ago, and then you already have like this book on it, basically.
Yeah, I kept track. I don't know why. I was just curious how long it would take me to write this thing, because I, of course, intended it to be a 10-minute read, and we all know at this point I can't do that. So, I started it on October 8th, and I finished it on Halloween, but I kept track of what days I actually got to work on it, and it only took me 13 days to write this thing. So,
yeah, but it's going to take everybody else 3 times as long to read it, probably,
Yeah, right, yeah.
L in the chat just said, I just read the first 15 pages of the blog post, but I haven't seen Squid Game yet. So you're presumably one of the kinds of people who doesn't care about spoilers then, and so therefore the whole get the fuck out of here thing doesn't apply to you. So welcome, L. It's good to see you. And I mean, of course, if you do want to save yourself from the spoilers, then you gotta get out. But the thing was, I was, so halfway through the show, I'm just like, okay, so has anyone else like done anything about Lacan in this? And so I put it in on YouTube, and I scrolled down, and then like 4 things down, I already gave 2 spoiler alerts, so I'm not going to do another one. I see a thumbnail that shows the old man, number 1, and above it, it says, why number 1 made the game. And I was like, halfway through the show, and I was like, oh, well, fuck. Now I know.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Dank Audio Stash says, has Zizek talked about the show yet? Actually, yeah. We should maybe link it. So and I was actually talking to Todd McGowan about Zizek's reaction to it. And Todd likes the show a lot more than Zizek. I don't think Todd would say it's like his favorite thing ever, but he certainly liked it. Zizek kind of is dismissive towards it, but if you know Zizek well enough, you know that he talks about this in interviews. A lot of the times he'll be writing and he'll just put a show on in the background, and if it doesn't register with him, he just doesn't like it. So I imagine he had Squid Game on in the back, and he didn't pay it much attention. I think the show is a lot better than he gives it credit for. And I mean, I'm using so much of his theory to show how the show is representative of Lacanian theory that, I think he just did a half-assed watching of it and was like, whatever, I think it's dumb. But I think if he watched it more closely, he would appreciate it.
He's probably used to multitasking, and he wasn't aware that it's in Korean, and so he wasn't reading the subs, and he was just confused, and he was just like, well, I don't know, I'll just keep doing other stuff. But I'm kidding. But I suspect that if you were to read your post, then he would get really excited about it. But so you would argue so that is your position then. This is a deeply Lacanian show and a good way to teach Lacan.
Yeah. I think the show really is a good example of Lacanian desire. Of course, there are movies and TV shows that are better examples of desire and they're more nuanced. But what I try to do with the post is show how the show really does capture various aspects of desire, various structures of it. So, I think it's deeply just creating the show, and he threw in the book for the reason you mentioned earlier. But I think if we were to ask him, he would say no. I mean, it did have a pretty big influence on me.
Well, I mean, what the old man number 1 says at the very end is kind of a Lacanian twist, but it is one that could have been kind of just thrown in there at the end, just kind of like, well, here's a way to kind of make it like clever or something, because it's like there's ways that's like not a satisfying answer. But before we get into that, now we're talking over the heads of the people who are fine with spoilers. So let's go ahead and just break down the show. Jay Grimes, before we jump into breaking down the show, though, just Jay Grimes was like, Squid Game is actually about capitalism, keyboard smash. Yeah, and I was just going to say that so obviously it is about capitalism, but at the same time, like, what ways is it about capitalism? What is it telling us about capitalism? And obviously desire, because capitalism and desire go hand in hand, which is why Lacan is often used to read Marx and vice versa. And then Jay Grimes was also like, genuine question, though, what's this I hear about psychoanalysis being discredited from Zizek? I mean, he opens The Sublime Object of Ideology, his first major work, with saying that in the wake of the Black Book on Communism and the Black Book on Psychoanalysis both having come out, which means that they're both like massively discredited, we need to turn to these things more than ever. And he's basically laying out an argument for why, even though, yes, the applications of psychoanalysis and the applications of Marxism have run afoul here and there in these various ways, and that we need to take very seriously. Nevertheless, we need to go into them with a critical approach. Otherwise, I might be reading into his motivations, but like otherwise, we don't know how affected we are by it, and then we're within it, but without knowing what it is, because we are, in a very real sense, inheritors of those projects. But if you haven't really thought that through, then you just have this watered down, stupid version of it anyway.
Well, I mean, one of his famous quotes is, to be a Marxist today, one has to go through Lacan.
Right. So what does that mean? So, but let's before we get into Lacan too much, let's back it up and just run through a quick little description of the show, of like its I don't know, how do you want to do this, Michael? But
I'd say, I mean, if you want to set the context, I mean, how would you describe the show? You know, give a summary or whatever.
So I'll start out by just saying that, like, people compare it to Battle Royale, which I haven't seen, Hunger Games, which I've read and seen, and Alice in Borderland, which was a Japanese show kind of similar to Squid Game that came out a year prior on Netflix, that I only watched half of, and to be perfectly honest, I don't find very interesting. And it's in the way, so it gets compared. And when I say it's not very interesting, I mean, I'm busy right now. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sure that if I was in the same place that I was when I watched all of Hunger Games, I'm sure I would have watched all of Alice in Borderland. But then again, they didn't do a whole lot to make you care about the characters in Alice in Borderland. Also, it's a lot more mysterious. You like just don't know why they're in this game, and so there's just a lot of senseless killing and dying, and it's not really scary. But I'm like feeling like, is this supposed to be scary, or is it a thriller? Is it like, if it's supposed to be like really exciting, it's not, because I don't care about these characters, because they didn't do anything to make me care about these characters. So when people say that, I've heard a lot of people say Alice in Borderland and Squid Game are basically the same show. I'm like, no, Squid Game is very different, because I deeply care about its characters. So there's they establish them very well. But the way that there is a similarity between these shows, though, is that it's taking desperate people in a shitty situation, and giving them a way out through some games. Now, in Alice in Borderland, it's a little different. It's more like a dystopian society where they're going to kill you unless you keep up on these credits, and you can only get these credits by playing in this game. So like, there's actually no way out, and it's not like provided as a way out of the system. Squid Game starts with someone who is addicted to gambling and has been ruining his life mooching off of his mother, and he's not being a very good dad. And he's obviously not very proud of himself, but he's also clearly staying pretty distracted by drinking and hanging out with his friends and going to the races and gambling. And so, from that angle, I was like, maybe there's a little bit of death drive here. Okay, maybe there's that. But then his life is just getting worse and worse. He doesn't have any money. He needs money. And a guy on the subway offers to play a game with him, which is like a Korean version of what's it called, Michael? Is it Pogs? It's like a Korean version of a game where you throw something on top of something else, and you...
Right, and you've got to flip it to its other side.
Yeah, and tells him, and obviously, like, Jung, the main character, and we'll get into my pronunciation later, but he doesn't want to communicate with this person. He's depressed at the subway. He's not trying to hang out. And this guy's like, well, you can win some money. And he like pulls out a bunch of money, and the guy's like, oh my God. So yeah, I'll play. But then if he loses, he's supposed to pay. And so he loses, and now he owes this stranger money that he doesn't have. And the guy's like, oh, no, I just slap you in the face, and that'll cover it, and slaps him in the face. Anyway, they go at it, playing and playing and playing. I mean, it looks like there's a montage. It's going on for a long time, hours. Basically, Jung is getting slapped in the face until his face is like turning red, and also getting money in the process. And then eventually the guy's like, hey, if you want to play some more games, get at me. Here's a business card. And then he's gone. So what is that? Basically, people all over the city of Seoul in South Korea who are in desperate situations, are ending up on their way to this game, and they get gassed in the back of a van So they fall asleep, and then it takes them to this place. They wake up in what's kind of like a prison, and then like they're supposed to get ready for some games. And then it turns out these games are games of life and death. If you watch the trailers, then you know instantly that these are games of life and death. But I hadn't watched the trailer at all. And so when the first time someone actually dies, I was like, oh, right, oh, okay. This is going to be like that then, you know. Mm-hmm. I didn't expect that. And so it makes it really intense because these people they want some money and they want out of their shitty situation. And then all of a sudden people are dying all around them, and if they move, they will be shot. But if they don't move, they will be shot. They just have to move in the right way. And so they're in a really, really crazy scenario right from the beginning. And obviously a lot of people aren't very happy about that. And they're like, well, you're here of your own free will. If the majority of you decides to leave, then you can leave. And they're like, this is bullshit. And then someone's like, well, then I want to go. And let's do the vote. And they do the vote. And it comes down to 50-50. The old man, number one, the guy who's actually turned out it was his game all along, you know, but you don't know that yet. He comes over, he votes, he agrees with the people who want to leave. Everyone leaves. But soon enough, they all go back, or at least a lot of them end up wanting to go back because their lives out there are so bad, and that this was like their one honest opportunity, but it was an actual opportunity to get out of the shitty situation that they are in. And so that element of free will, of seeming free will, of seeming consent, of seeming fairness, those elements in the game make it a lot more interesting than one that just makes a mockery of the human that they've taken and reduced to the level of an animal. This one kind of tricks them along the way, telling them, you know, making them think that they're all equal before the rules of the game.
And it seduces their desire.
And it seduces their desire in doing so, yeah. What am I leaving out that you really want to add in at this point? We're like halfway through.
No, I mean, I think that's that basically sets a good context, and I do. I think that's part of what's interesting about it is that there's a sense in which they are guilty. They do desire to participate. I think that makes it more interesting, at least in a certain way, than Hunger Games or Battle Royale. And again, I haven't seen Battle Royale in a long time, but if I remember correctly, they're not choosing in any way, shape, or form to be there. I need to rewatch that, but I do think that's the thing that's interesting about Squid Game. And yet at the same time, of course, you know, I'm not just going to do the easy, they're personally responsible thing either.
Right.
Because there's a certain truth to the concept of responsibility. I'm not denying that, but the way it gets used especially by capitalist ideology, is to always obfuscate the background conditions, material conditions that people are living in. And it treats you as if you're just a pure, unrestrained, free subject that has no connections or facticity or material conditions. And that's where the ideology of responsibility comes into play.
Okay. They're all in. Or the cell block or the whatever. And like it's this giant see-through piggy bank with a bunch of cash in it. And then more cash gets added every time one of them dies. And the stakes go up with every game. And the games involve things like they all, what are some of the games? We got like the sugar cookie thing. How do you even describe that? Like, it's like a sugar cookie. They got to cut out a shape on it, but if they don't do it within the time limit, or if the cookie breaks, then they get shot. Yep. There's a tug of war game where the side that loses falls, which is, you know, some of the games, as you get going, you start to realize this game is really actually messed up. I mean, it was always messed up, but at least the first game kind of sets the stage where it's like, hey, you know, it's like Simon Says, you know, you just go, you run when you're supposed to, you stop when you're supposed, you know, red light, green light. That's all it is. Yep. And as long as you play by the rules, you'll win. But then later it's like, no, you might just end, you've got to get into a team of 10 people. Why? We're not going to tell you. Just get into a team of 10 people. And then once you're in a team of 10 people, you find out you're playing tug of war, like 200 feet over the ground. So you're being pulled towards a ledge now. So all of a sudden these teams become less arbitrary. And then and in a sort of sense, like the game becomes increasingly unfair. like there's a point when people are to team up with another person. This is the saddest part of the whole show. And so obviously people are, husband and wife team up, best friends team up, outcasts get together, whatever. But then they find out that it's a game to the death.
Yeah.
They're playing, what were they playing? Like marbles?
Playing against each other. Yeah, it's marbles.
Yeah. And, that one's really rough, and we'll get into desire and how it functions there and everything like that, I'm sure. But you work your way through it. The protagonist wins. I mean, he's not happy with winning. He's actually very sad about winning. He's basically living homeless, even though he's got all this money. And all these characters that you grew to love have died. So what's the fucking point of this whole show? Well, basically the guy who like designed the game with a bunch of other billionaires and bankers. I mean, this guy's a banker. He's a lender. He says that he makes his living making money off of interest, lending money. It's basically he's just saying that he doesn't think that rich people or poor people get to really have a good life. And it's for poor people, they just don't have any of the things they need. And for rich people, they have too many things and they can have anything they want. And so it's just not interesting anymore. I mean, that's basically what he says, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so.
Yeah, basically, I mean, the way I frame it is that he and the other capitalists, the VIPs, they all have a crisis of desire, that they've actually accumulated so much wealth that they're not even able to desire like an average human being. And that's part of the problem here.
Yeah. Yeah. And Anne said, most of these people in desperate situations owe some sort of debt to someone. It's a really important point, is that this really is, in a sort of way, not just about capitalism, but about people in debt in capitalism, and the kinds of people who don't have to work real jobs, who just live off of lending to people who are in desperate situations, which almost always just means using your mathematical wits to fuck over people who don't even have an education.
Yeah.
But
well, and I mean, there's a really important book called get the title right. It's really relevant to this show. I only mention it in passing in the blog post. It's called Indebted Man, I believe.
Yeah, you do mention that, and debt the first 5,000 years. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, those are two key references, I would say, for thinking about debt. And I mean, obviously there's other books too, but let's see.
I mean, so that's my quick rundown on just like the structure of the show. Your blog post is the other way around. You started out by saying, hey, so you just finished binge watching Squid Game and you just got one nagging question. What was that reference to Lacan's theory of desire? Well, folks, I'm here to tell you, but it won't be easy. So, get ready for it. And then you're all an hour and 20 minutes of just Lacanian theory with a lot of great examples and everything, just breaking down the concepts. And then at the end of all of that, you go into your analysis of the structure of desire in and for like the characters, the subjects within the story.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know how you want to go about this, if you want to follow a similar format or what.
For now, I think it's probably best for us let's talk what Lacan means by desire, and then we can move into a discussion of Squid Game. This is going to definitely be cliff notes. We're not going to do an hour and 20 minutes on Lacanian desire here, but I say we can at least run through the basics of it.
Cool. What is desire?
Okay, so the first thing to be said is that desire for Lacan is not just what you consciously will. Like if you just sit there and go, oh, what do I want? I want this. It's not that simple. And desire is largely unconscious for Lacan. It's not to say that it never can become conscious. I mean, part of what psychoanalysis does is do that. But largely, what we think we want is not what we want. And we don't really, at a conscious level, we actually think that if we get X, Y, and Z, we're going to be happy, and that we will satisfy our desire. We will cease to be desiring subjects. That there is a state called happiness where we don't desire anything else, right? And part of what Lacan does is show that that's completely wrong. That's
right.
not,
What is being refuted is the idea of individual subjectivities, individual little, persons that are motivated by their desire for pleasure and from pain. They want to get away from pain and towards pleasure. And when you have modernity with philosophy, Newton's a very big deal, and his physics are a very big deal. And what you have in Thomas Hobbes is taking that Newtonian model, adding it to humans as atoms who have been individuated, through, a sort of Cartesian approach to subjectivity, stripped down to individuals. But he basically looks at them as atoms in motion, where what is driving them is they're being propelled away from discomfort and towards comfort. And that's basically just the picture. And then political economy runs with that. And so all of the Adam Smith and Ricardo and all of these capitalist philosopher types, they were basically working with that notion, though they had a different idea, in various ways, but it's based on that idea of individualism. And so that is being deconstructed here.
Echo homonomicus, which is to say, what human beings primarily are individuals with individual desires and needs. They know what they want, and they rationally seek the satisfaction of their desires through the market. And this is where, Freud himself saw psychoanalysis as a kind of, it's deflating in a sense, because what it does is it makes individuals who think they're masters in their own house realize that they're not really running the show, that they're not really in control, and that what they think they want isn't really what they want. What they think they enjoy is not actually what they enjoy. So long story short, it's the Freudian concept of the unconscious, that we are divided subjects. We are split between conscious and unconscious, and they are not harmonious. They don't form a coherent whole, that they are very much in an antagonistic relationship to one another. And that's the decentering of the subject, the decentering of the subject. So that's part of what psychoanalysis did originally with Freud, and Lacan, very much with his return to Freud, is carrying on this tradition. And there's a reason why psychoanalysis is often marginalized, or they attempt to discredit it. They want to prop up some form of psychology that's egocentric, which Lacan called ego psychology.
Which, by the way, when we talk about American psychoanalysis, it is ego psychology.
Right, exactly. Because if we want to even call it psychoanalysis.
So in a way, responding to that question earlier about how Zizek had referenced that psychoanalysis has been discredited, this is one of the main reasons why it's been discredited. Also, the idea that traumas that get repressed need to be recovered, and that idea in the clinical space was causing false memories to surface, and it created a sort of there was a lot of legal problems in the late 80s and early 90s with what was going on there. But Lacan is not doing that. That is not an American psychoanalyst in that situation is literally trying to get you to remember things and like egging it on, and to the point where they're basically planting stuff. Whereas the Lacanian isn't talking.
They're not speak, right?
They don't lead you.
I mean, they're trained not to do that. That's the whole point, is to punctuate or highlight certain things in speech, but to not lead you anywhere. They're not trying to be your moral guide. They're not, in a sense, they're not even trying to solve your problems. What they're trying to do is I mean, there's many ways to talk about what Lacanian psychoanalysis seeks to do, but one way is just to have a subject come to terms with what their desire is, where they can even just name, or Lacan calls it naming your desire in Seminar 2, but another way to put it is just like where you claim what you actually desire, right? And psychoanalysis is not trying to teach you how to live. It's not a guru. It's nothing like that. And so, but a lot of psychology turns into that. Like, I mean,
Right.
I know people with therapists, and their therapist is their buddy. It's, you know, their therapist is their friend and their confidant, and a lot of the times even their master.
Right.
And that is not at all what the Lacanian psychoanalyst seeks to be. So, yeah. And so Lacan, I mean, especially early on, if you read his Écrit, which I can't really recommend, but
don't do it. Don't do it. I've tried. It's hard. I've tried many times, actually. Just that fucking that one on the chapter on Poe, the Purloined Letter. I've tried to read that so many times.
The better one, you got to read that analysis in Seminar 2. He leaves out all the important details in the Écrit. So
really, oh, really,
yeah.
Well, that's important.
It's funny.
Know.
I mean, this is kind of, we're going off track, but real quick. So Derrida, he wrote a critique of Lacan, and it was based on Derrida's interpretation of Lacan's writing on Poe in the Purloined Letter. And Derrida, as far as I understand, he only read the Écrit version. And so you can say that what he says makes some sense in relation to that. But if you go to the part in Seminar 2, he has all like these, a lot of the answers to Derrida's critiques are there. And he just didn't mention them. He didn't go into them in the Écrit version. So, but the thing is with the Écrit, especially the early writings,
and just context for people who are like, what? So this was, so Lacan did not write books. He was he just gave like this seminar his whole life, and he wrote a few essays. And you know, he presented them places, and they were in journals, and it was a big deal or whatever, but he wasn't like pumping out books. And Écrit was basically an attempt to like, okay, here's a bunch of my stuff in one place, but it wasn't meant to be readable, and definitely not by a general public. And it's I mean, everyone says don't read it. And it's bad. It's really notoriously bad. But the funny thing that I wanted to make sure to bring up, just historical context, is that like it turned out to be like a bestseller.
Right.
So that was a problem for Lacan. And he even talks about that in his, I think he talks about this in his little book, My Teaching. But he's just like, yeah, it wasn't meant to be this popular thing. And so when it became one, I was just like, oops, so there'd be an interesting essay just on philosophy books that actually became bestsellers, or at least very popular, like Sloterdijk's critique of Cynical Reason became a bestseller in Germany. Right.
Yeah, it's a weird phenomenon.
It's just like the right time. It's just it makes a splash, but then nobody can understand it. So everyone's like, "What is this?" But so he was definitely a dynamic, charismatic, powerful, kind of attractive figure in France at the time. Also controversial. His lectures were packed, and he would do these public lectures, and you would have like all of these other people come. Like they're not just students. They're not just like other professors. He was like just doing like these public lectures. And where Michael ends up going the most is like his actual seminars. And then obviously,
I mean, that's where the real teaching is. I mean, look, here's the thing. If you learn the seminars, the Écrit, the writings in the Écrit are intelligible a lot of the time. And you can make sense of them eventually, but it's like you got to know the theory before you read those essays. And you can't, I mean, maybe somebody could, I don't want to say can't absolutely, but it would be very rare that somebody could go to the Écrit, start off there, and actually get what Lacan's talking about. I mean, to me, it seems pretty impossible. But the seminars, for example, they're a lot more intelligible, and that's where, I camp out in the seminars. And
so the seminar that's on the desk. The seminar that's on the desk in Squid Game on the back is Seminar 11.
Right. And Seminar 11, it is considered his, I mean, there's a general consensus that it's his most important seminar. It's certainly the one that people tend to read first. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Um, I told you recently that I almost think it's best to start with 1 and 2. You're
Yeah.
not going to get the Lacan there that is the famous Lacan, the Lacan that Zizek's using and that Badiou is interacting with. And
Right.
yeah, so if we want to think like the period in Lacan's work that's been the most influential on philosophers is really seminars 11 through 16. Now, there's other important ones. 17 is really important. That's the 4 discourses. Seminar 20 is incredibly influential. That's where he's talking about the graph of sexuation, sexual difference, etc. But I think like core Lacan is seminar 11 through 16. The funny thing is, except for 11, none of those have had official translations. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's bizarre that his richest period is the one that hasn't been translated. And as far as I understand, a lot, if not all of them, most of those don't even have official French editions yet. So I don't know. So the inheritor of Lacan's work is his son-in-law, Jacques-Alain Millière. And Millière, for whatever reason, he hasn't put out those seminars. And as far as I know, he said he's done doing his editing. So I don't know what's going to happen with him because I'm dying for official editions of these. Now, the good news is there's a guy named Cormac Gallagher, who is an Irish psychoanalytic thinker, I think actual psychoanalyst too. There's unofficial translations of these seminars, and you can get them from his website, and they're free to download. But again, they're unofficial, and I think he did it just for his teaching purposes, so he could teach his students these. But yeah, I think it's a shame that we don't have, official translations and editions of these core seminars. But yeah.
So for Squid Game, what is
Right.
the seminar that you are going to draw the most off of?
Well, and that's the problem, right? Is because there's not. I'm going to read a quote here. I'm not going to read 100 quotes tonight, but this one is worth reading. This is from Zizek. This is from Tearing with the Negative, and Zizek says, "Is not his Lacan's entire work an endeavor to answer the question of how desire is possible? Does he not offer a kind of critique of pure desire, of the pure faculty of desiring? Are not all his fundamental concepts so many keys to the enigma of desire? Desire is constituted by symbolic castration, the original loss of the thing. The void of this loss is filled out by objet petit a, the fantasy object. This loss occurs on account of our being embedded in the symbolic universe, which derails the natural circuit of our needs, etc., etc." Now, obviously that's complicated, and we can unpack all that. But his point is that really from the beginning of his seminar, and maybe even before that, to the end of it, Zizek's saying desire is Lacan's key concept, or at least his main focus. So for nearly, what is the seminar, 28 years, something like that, nearly 3 decades, he spent thinking about desire, conceptualizing it, reconceptualizing it. And so it's not like there's one seminar. I mean, there is a seminar called Desire and its Interpretation. I believe that's seminar 6. But he's talking about desire the whole time. It's like Heidegger with being, right? He's always talking about being. So there's not really one central seminar that I'm really basing my understanding off of. Like the stuff on the Mobius strip and how that relates to desire. That comes from, I believe the seminars 13 and 14. So that in the unofficial translations, I had to quote Gallagher's translations for those passages. But I mean, yeah, we could say that a lot of what I'm saying is coming out of seminar 7, because that's a very key essential seminar. And I mean, Lacanians are still wrestling with what to do with seminar 7. But I mean, I guess, look, if we want to say one seminar, maybe seminar 11, because a lot of it does come out of there. It's just
Okay.
that period really from seminar 11 to 16 that I'm drawing on the most.
So okay. Now, we've talked a bit about Lacan again, and we talked about the show. We talked about Lacan, but really quick, let's just do some let's do some proofs. Let's show people that Lacanian desire is structuring Squid Game. Let's just jump into it. Can you run us through? I ran everyone through the show in the standard way. I think almost anybody basically would. So, but now, can you just give us the quick version of run through the desire structure of the game and of the subjectivities in the game with a few examples?
Well, here's the thing, right? I think we need to flesh out desire a little bit before we
can do
Squid
that.
Game. I think it's better. Let's just talk about Lacanian desire for a little bit, and then we'll talk about the show.
All right.
Okay, so for Lacan, he thinks that desire is the result of what is called symbolic castration. Now, all this means essentially is the process of socialization. That's how we typically would talk about it, right? Where a young child is used to having all of its needs met by its primary caregiver, who's usually its mother, but not necessarily the biological mother. When Lacan says the mother, he really just means the child's primary caregiver. That could be a man, woman, whoever, right? A grandparent, uncle, foster parent, whatever. And so the mother is the figure who meets all the child's needs, right? And the child is caught up in certain forms of idealized state, right? Children cry, children get fussy. It's not perfect. But at some point, however, some third party has to intervene and say, look, you can't cling to your primary caregiver forever. And also says, hey, it's time for you, the primary caregiver, to not cling to the child forever. And this third party says no. This dynamic can't go on forever. You have to separate. And this third party is called the father. But again, it could be a woman who actually does this, right? It doesn't have to be a biological man. And so the child has to undergo a loss, right? So the child realizes, oh, I can't continue to live the way I'm living. I have to undergo a certain change. I have to start living in accordance with the norms of society, what's expected of me. It's also the most important event, arguably, in our lives, right? That we have to lose something we never really had to begin with. The thing that gets sacrificed, there's different ways Lacan will talk about it. One way is to refer to it as the thing, as the German term is das Ding. And this thing
Das
is
Ding.
essentially, right, yeah.
Das, yeah.
It's the body of the primary caregiver. Now, we also don't want to make too strong of an identification with the body of the primary caregiver, because really what happens is that once the child is told no, and once the child has assimilated that and really accepted it, okay, this dynamic can't continue, it's really an empty space that is das Ding. It's lost something, and that the position or space in which that thing existed in, that space is now empty. And so it's not a physical space. It's not like a spot in physical space you could locate. It's a space in the psyche. And again, Lacan doesn't really use psyche much, but it's a space in our psyche, a space in our subjectivity, a space in our libidinal economy. But it's an empty space. It's the space that the thing apparently, supposedly, once existed in, but now is lost. Right?
Right. Okay.
So this is where the key Lacanian concept of retroactivity comes into play, where retroactivity is where something in the present changes something in the past, right? Or at least changes how we perceive the past. And so we can say in reality that das Ding, this body of enjoyment, right? This site of pre-social, pre-linguistic enjoyment is actually retroactively produced. It never was there to begin with. It's not really what the relationship between the child and the primary caregiver was all about. But retroactively, it's as if the child goes, oh, I had some sort of perfect enjoyment in connection, in a kind of symbiotic relationship with the thing, with the primary caregiver as a source of enjoyment. And that loss is what socialization involves. And so once this thing is now gone, now that it's lacking, you lack.
And just to be concrete, we're talking, so socialization meaning not pooping on the floor, right? Like we're talking.
It means having to live in accordance with social norms, customs, protocols, codes of behavior, moral expectations, etc.
Right. So, but these are things that you're taught, like when you're before you have words, you learn that, you know, you're being potty trained, you know,
exactly.
Before you're speaking, you're being potty trained. And so it's just like, there are all these rules being put on you, and you're being told, no, the things that you are doing, you will not continue to do. You are going to change in these ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And so Lacan calls this symbolic castration. What you're castrated from, what you lose in order to become a social being, to become a member of society, is your enjoyment, which the French term is jouissance. And it means enjoyment to the point of suffering. It means an overly intense form of enjoyment. And of course, nobody had this perfect enjoyment, but we retroactively think prior, in some pre-social, pre-linguistic state, that we had it, when again we didn't. Childhood, even early infancy, is not just perfect enjoyment all the time. So it's a retroactive construction, retroactive fantasy. But this sense of loss actually becomes, I mean, that's what we are. We are the lack of this. We exist as missing this perfect enjoyment. And so this is where desire enters in, right? Lacan conceptualizes desire as a lack. Like, you desire because there's something you don't have that you ought to have, something that you're missing that you once had, but again, you didn't really have it. But for desire, what desire is essentially seeking is this lost enjoyment. And the point is, for the subject, for the human being, this is what creates our sense of being incomplete, right? Part of me, that there's something, if I just got the it, that I would be whole, right? And this is the whole thing. So for the child who's just wrapped up in the care of its primary caregiver, you can understand pretty much instantaneously. And so it gets idealized retroactively. And the idea is that what occurs is that some part of you lose some chunk of yourself. Like, now you're not ontologically whole, you're ontologically lacking. And it's as if there's a fragment of yourself that's missing. And ultimately, this is what causes you to desire, is that some part of your positive being has been lost and you're trying to regain that positive part. But again, the positive part of your being is really nothing. It's not an actual real thing. It's a structure of how desire itself is formulated. And so,
So how, because a really important thing here is that this is separate from needs, and that we're not natural creatures in the sense that we don't have natural needs. And somehow desire and our drives and all this have come sort of unglued from nature or something. Could you go into that? Because I know that something some people will be thinking is, well, this is a really interesting story about how actually, about desire, but, then think it's more, well, why not just apply Occam's razor and say we desire food because we get hungry, and then we want a diversity of food because we need a diversity of nutrients and our body just wants to diversify. Like, you know what I mean? When it's like, No, that's not a sufficient answer. But can you go into what the
Right.
what the Lacanian thing here is that well why that's not the case?
So yeah, Lacan, he has another way of talking about this process of socialization. So what we've been talking about is really this whole process of symbolic castration. The other way to talk about it is what he calls the need, demand, desire dialectic. So there's three parts here: need, demand, desire. So you start off as a child, infant. Of course, you have biological needs. There's certain imperatives that must be met in order for you to maintain a certain pleasure in your body, a certain homeostasis, and you have to be fed. You have to be kept at a certain temperature, right? You got to be cleaned. And so these biological imperatives operate in early life, but the second language gets brought into the mix. This is where things change for us as human beings as opposed to animals, is that once the child has developed language enough to understand that parents are making demands on them and that they themselves can make demands, what happens is that at first it's like, okay, I'm hungry. I'm using language to express that I'm hungry. So the child makes a demand. I want food, right? But this also opens up a whole new field of possibilities, because as language seeps in, once the child's cognitive abilities develop, it realizes like, oh, wait, meeting my needs isn't just that simple. Like, it carries a social meaning, right? And so the kid starts to realize like, oh, wait, like if I ask for something, it means that I'm loved. It means that I'm cared for, right? And so whereas the demand started off being an expression of a need, it soon drifts into being a demand for love. And this is why Lacan he says every demand is a demand for love. And the point, though, is as this happens and as this develops, the needs fade into the background. And once they are completely detached from us making demands, well, then now we enter into desire. And which is to say, desire desires things that we don't have any biological reasons to desire them. We just desire them because of we think they're going to provide enjoyment or they give us a certain social status, but they have nothing to do with meeting biological criteria. And so this is his way of explaining how we go from biological instinct to non-biological desire. And right, so like I was saying, we end up desiring this missing part of ourselves, and that's what causes desire. What causes us to desire, the thing that jumpstarts or initiates desire, is that we feel like some part of ourselves is missing. He calls this objet petit a. It's a French term, and all it means, if we translate it straightforwardly, is object small o. And all it stands for is that ultimate object of desire, which motivates all of our desire behind the scenes. It's that it's really a nothing. It's not a physical object. It's not an actual object of desire. It's a virtual object. It's a nothingness that we're chasing. And this, I mean, here's the thing. Like, if you take even Lacanian theory and bracket it, right? We all know that there's a sense in which no matter what I get, no matter what I pursue, once I get it, I'm still not perfectly satisfied. Like, every object I think will make me happy, whether it's a new job or it's a new car or falling in love with the right person, what you find is that no matter how happy those things can make you momentarily, you still end up desiring something else. And so this experience we all have of, oh, I'm pursuing the thing. I can't wait. It's going to make me so happy. I get it. And then you're disappointed because it didn't satisfy you to the degree you thought it would. And Lacan is thinking through the very fundamental structure of why this is the case when it comes to desire. And for him, the ultimate object of desire, which he calls the cause of desire, is a nothingness. It's the part of ourselves that's lacking, that we, and I'm going to use some terms that he doesn't, but I think they help here. It's the lack in ourselves that we've reified and projected outwards. Like there's a missing chunk of ourselves out there, and like some object carries this treasure, right? If we get the right object of desire, we're going to get the real thing that we're really desiring and searching for. And the whole point is, this is actually a nothing. It's not a real thing, and yet it structures our whole lives, right? Our whole desire, our whole existence is based around the pursuit of a nothing, a thing that doesn't actually exist.
And is this why the pursuit of pleasure in Buddhism is suffering, or is there a critique of Buddhism here?
Well, I mean, in the blog post, I in little paragraph, I guess if you want to call it a critique of Buddhism, maybe. I just think that what the Buddhists in this idea of, oh, I'm gonna seek nothingness. And again, some Buddhists wouldn't even go for this, right? But if you get an introduction to Buddhism or Buddhism for Dummies, you're going to do the Four Noble Truths, and
right.
The basic idea is that Buddhists seek annihilation, right, to enter nirvana. And what I make the point is that in pursuing this nothing, they don't realize that they're actually pursuing an object. It's just objet petit a. It's a virtual object.
Yeah, because they don't, okay.
It's like they actually create a pure desire instead of
seeking to not desire, they desire to not desire, is what you were saying.
There's that, but it's the idea that if all desire, like if the objects we desire are really just mediations in relationship to the pure object, the objet petit a, then they're like desiring without a go-between. They're desiring objet petit a without any objects of desire mediating the relationship. So we can say that they've formed a pure desire, like as if like they're not even trying to find objet in a go-between. They're just seeking the pure nothing itself.
So if we decide to not use the jargon and we were just going to keep talking about it, which we're not going to do, we will say objet petit a. Objet petit a. Yeah, we'll say that. But what would be it would be that missing part of you?
Like, so there's different ways, and I try to think about like what's the best English translation, because object small o is not it, right? It doesn't do anything for us.
I think it should be like a rapper, Lil A. You know?
That's funny. Yeah, that's good. Honestly, so I like the term virtual object. I think that's good. I also like
virtual object.
Yeah. Maybe an even better one is the impossible object of desire. I think that is good too, because it gets at the point that the ultimate thing that you're pursuing, the proverbial donkey's carrot, right, that keeps us moving, keeps our desire going, is essentially something we can never get.
But this is the object cause, right? Not the object.
This is the cause. So,
but when we say object A or a small object, we are talking about the object cause. Someone fucking said that Michael in the post was getting these two things conflated, and it wasn't true.
Yeah, no. Again,
object A.
And I had a good laugh about this.
Oh yeah.
He was just like, so I don't know. Todd McGowan is one. I mean, he to me is the leading Lacanian theorist in America, who is doing social critique of capitalism, etc. And I've gotten to know Todd a little bit, and we were talking, and I told him that somebody accused me of misunderstanding Lacan because I said objet petit a and objet a are the same thing,
and use them interchangeably.
Of course, every Lacanian in the world knows objet a is just a shorthand for objet petit a. They're the exact same thing. And Todd was just like, he's like, I'm being honest, like I don't know how anybody could actually make that mistake.
Yeah, no, and he was like taking a shit on your post, trying to say that like, it's pretty good, but you got something so fundamental wrong. How could you get it so wrong? And then I was like, there was this moment when I was like, because I had shared it, and I was like, oh dang, could Michael have gotten that wrong? And so I screenshotted it and sent it to you, and you were just laughing, and you were like, later, like I just got to see like all these different like quotes from like 10 different authors who are Lacanians, including a bunch of direct quotes from Lacan, where he uses them interchangeably, and they all use it interchangeably. And then I shared
Right.
that, and the person was like, "You're still wrong."
Double down.
Doubled down. Yeah, it was hilarious. It was like, what? You can't double down on that. Like, it's, I'm sorry, but like sometimes when you're talking theory, like, it's up for
You really
interpretation.
can get to the bottom of something.
But sometimes you can get to the bottom of it, and that was proof.
Right.
So the small little, our little A. Yeah.
Right. So it is.
Okay.
I mean, it is fair to say it's the missing part of ourselves. We just have to remember that in the strictest ontological sense, there is no missing part of ourselves, and yet it's the very structure of our ontology. I know that sounds paradoxical, but the reason it's paradoxical, or it really isn't, it's just we're shifting between two different theories of ontology. So if we take a traditional substance ontology like Aristotle's or even Descartes, right? Objet petit a is a non-entity. It's not a being. It's not real. But if you take what Lacan is doing, which it does involve a kind of Hegelian dialectical ontology opposed to substance ontology, then you can say that objet a is, even though it's not a substance that exists independently on its own, right? That it's caught up in a negative relationship with the subject. And I know that sounds complicated, but
yeah, you're not helping.
Okay. Think about it like this, right? Well, but this is why I use the term virtual. So let's
right.
I think when we think about language, this is helpful. So there are statements in language that are virtually there, that language has made possible, that no one has ever spoken.
Right.
Right. But there's still virtual potentialities. There are possibilities within language, even though no one's ever articulated them before, actually spoke them. And so the point is they're virtually real. They're there. They're waiting to be spoken. They're possibilities within language, yet they've never been actualized. But the moment they've been actualized, they shifted registers, but it didn't change the fact they were real in the virtual sense before they were ever actually spoken.
Right.
Okay. Objet petit a is like that. It's like a virtual statement. Only here it's a virtual object. The difference is it's a virtual object that cannot, by definition, be actualized. But it is a virtual object.
It's stuck in the virtual.
It's stuck in the virtual, which Lacan would say it's stuck in the real, right? But that's the thing. It does have a certain reality precisely because our reality is based on not having it. But, I mean, look, if we do like a real kind of strict ontology or, a metaphysical thought experiment, if there were no human beings, would there be objets? No. It does depend on us, right? But the point is, and this is key, we depend on it to be the type of beings we are. To be desiring subjects in the way that we are, we have to have this impossible object we're constantly in pursuit of, that's constantly causing us to desire specific things, which ultimately are unsatisfactory, and we keep desiring.
So if I was hearing this right now, I think I'd be thinking, okay, so I guess maybe like the screenwriters of Squid Game wanted to think about desire this way, but why should I, or like how in the world does Lacan come to this realization that desire works this way? Because I think I brought that up with you, and that's when you kind of explained your take on a way of describing what psychoanalysis is for Lacan.
And again, he wouldn't like this, but I guess for somebody who's not like, I try not to talk. I mean, and maybe I fail at this point. Maybe I'm too much one of the initiated in Lacanian theory, but I always try to avoid that where if somebody asks me what one of these terms mean, I'm able to do it. And getting all of this because he's an actual psychoanalyst. He's not a philosopher. He's not a social theorist. He's not doing critical theory. He's not doing politics. What he's basing his teaching on is what he's dealing with his patients while doing psychoanalysis.
Right.
And so certain Lacanians probably would give me shit for using this term, but I don't care. I think it's helpful. What Lacan is essentially doing, if you're asking me, okay, he says all this shit, but what's it based on? What's the evidence?
Right.
I like to say it's a second person phenomenology. That what he's doing is he's taking account, based on the psychoanalytic tools he has, of the other person's speech, the analysand, which that's another term for the patient, right?
Right.
One of his patients comes in, they start talking, right? And he tries to get them to free associate to the best of their abilities. And what he's doing is he's experiencing their speech through a conceptual framework that he got from Freud and that he's redeveloping. And he's experiencing their speech in a certain way. And so what he's finding oftentimes is that they'll say, they'll talk about their demands. They'll talk about the demands that other people in their lives make on them, whether it be their parents or their children or their husbands and wives, their bosses, right? And what you come to realize is that, and this is a key aspect of this whole thing, right? You realize that when people make demands of you, and even when you make demands of other people, if you follow the other person's demands perfectly, or if they follow your demands perfectly, you both aren't happy. You're still both unsatisfied. And so there's what we demand, and then there's what we desire. And they're not coherent.
Okay.
That there's Lacan would just say that he sees it clear as day.
Ouch. Ouch. I hope nobody had to hear that PC sound.
Oh, I heard it.
Okay, so everyone heard it. Okay, well, whoops. So basically, the non-correlation of demand and desire it undermines that homo economicus. It also, I mean, if everybody understood it, consumerism and all the advertising and marketing in the world wouldn't work. Just because, maybe it would. But the thing is like, in a way, it can make you step back and go, wait, that won't do it for me. I think that will do it. Like I want to own that. Why do I want to own that? Why don't I like a boat? Why do I need a boat? Why don't I just go use one for a day? Why do I have to own a boat? Well, because all the people in my age category in this kind of neighborhood, they have a boat, and then you go, wait a minute, you little A.
But think about it though. Even if you get the social recognition, you find that the social recognition really wasn't what you were looking for. And so that's why Lacan, a lot of thinkers of desire think that what we desire is recognition. I mean, even Hegel says this in Phenomenology of Spirit. Zizek's always constantly marrying Lacanian theory with Hegel's philosophy, but this is one of the points where Lacan and Hegel are just different. Lacan thinks that desire is ultimately for this little lost object in the real, this virtual object that is permeated with jouissance, right? Like if we get it, we're gonna get the full enjoyment back, right? And it doesn't have anything to do with social status, with recognition. Whereas for Hegel, he thinks that desire is fundamentally geared towards recognition, and that mutual recognition, or he even talks about how he's considered a theorist of mutual recognition, but he's the one who explains why mutual recognition doesn't work, and that there's a deadlock intrinsic to recognition. But regardless, he thinks desire pursues recognition. So this is one of the ways in which they're different. And so the point is, when you're chasing social status, which is certainly something we do, you're trying to get a certain recognition. But ultimately, beyond that, it's not really the symbolic social recognition you're after. There's an enjoyment beyond that's what you're really in pursuit of. And so that again is objet petit a. Another way to talk about it is, and I think it's important to use as many different English terms for it as we can. Think about it like this, right? When objet petit a gets connected to somebody, right, or to some object, that object, that person, they have what we can call it the it factor. They have the X factor. We also use the French term je ne sais quoi, right? That's something that you can't really put your finger on. You can't name it, but they've got it, right? That's objet petit a. Like there's something more in them than them themselves. I mean, Lacan refers to it all the time, is that there's something more in you than you yourself. And this is the fundamental structure of desire, is that desire is ultimately aiming at an impossible an object it can never get, and yet it's constantly seeking that object in empirical concrete objects, and that's why they fail, because they're never fully identical with the virtual object it's chasing. And so that's essentially the structure of desire for Lacan, is that you're chasing something you can't get.
Okay. L in the chat says, why must we decide to believe that humans are necessarily always on hedonic treadmills in this way? What about the people who are relatively satisfied? I've wondered. I've won. You'd like to meet one? That's the answer. Because this. So I mean, is that a critique that this is of subjectivity in a consumerist society specifically, or of a specific class in France?
Well, maybe. I mean, I think we have to ask that question, but I don't know. I think if you look at older novels, right? If you look at even great poems, like, there is a sense in which you find that the great protagonists, they're always chasing something and they never get their hands on it. That the object of desire is ultimately elusive. And look, here's the thing. There's no, like, Lacan would never have any problem saying that there's moments in your life that you can feel like, oh, you're fully satisfied, right? That can happen. Like, moments of happiness are possible. They're just beyond our control. They almost happen by accident. And so if somebody finds a moment of peace, or if they find a moment of great happiness, he's not saying those aren't possibilities. He's just saying they're not permanent.
And he's not saying that there's not real misery and real, like, unnecessary misery, or pain and suffering that couldn't be alleviated, right? Like, we're not and that the desire to alleviate that is just fits into this structure either. But
so go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, no, go. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, talking about hegemony, though, I think that's important because, and I've only recently, like, it's one of these things where I knew it, but I didn't know it fully. Like, I didn't know it the way I've got it now. So one of Zizek's greatest interventions when it comes to talking about ideology, which, I mean, we can talk about it as hegemony too, right? But what he points out, he uses this Lacanian insight, but instead of just dealing with individual patients in the clinic, he takes these Lacanian ideas and he applies them to the social order itself. And so Zizek, in a lot of ways, is building his theory of ideology as a response to Althusser's theory of ideology. Now, Althusser was very much a structuralist, which means that he really kind of, like, he leaves room for the ego. He leaves room for what Lacan would call the imaginary, but he doesn't really think in terms of the real, right? Which is this virtual space that we've been talking about, right? And primarily Althusser thinks that once ideology addresses you or hails you, right, says, hey, you, and makes a demand on you, you, in submitting to it, are now an ideological subject, and you're just caught up in the framework of it, and you're almost like just part of the machine. That there's no part of you that's left that's a remainder, and that you're just fully integrated into this ideological system. And in other words, it's like, I don't think Althusser leaves much room for freedom. I think he is very much a kind of determinist. And he thinks that once ideology's caught you, then you're just kind of part of its mechanism. Zizek totally rejects that, and he rejects it on Lacanian grounds. And it's very simple that this moment of ideological interpolation, which is to say, like, when ideology or an ideological figure addresses you, speaking from the position of power. I mean, of course, his famous example is that of a cop. When a cop looks at you and goes, hey, you, right? And of course, it's not the hey, you, it's not even necessarily addressed to you, right? It's a misrecognition. But even if the cop's shouting it down the street, it assails you. Like, you feel you have to submit to that decree, that address from power.
Right.
And he thinks that's how we're essentially hooked into ideology, is through this type. He calls it interpolation. But for Zizek, he says, look, he's missing this key moment, right? So what we were talking about a minute ago with demand and desire. I know that we talked about this in one of the other episodes, but I have a better understanding of why it's important now. So Peter Rollins is a Lacanian theologian, and I got this great example from him. It's fantastic. So he says, look, let's talk about the difference between demand and desire, right? Let's really see it. So imagine you're a small kid, you're about to go to school for the first time, and your parents sit you down and say, hey, look, when you go to school, it's important for you to remember, we don't believe in violence in this family. So you're not allowed to hit anybody. Don't do it. So the kid goes to school, and, you know, eventually he encounters a bully. The bully starts picking on him. And as time goes by, the bullying gets worse. And it's to the point now the bully is beating the kid up, punching the kid. And so the kid goes home and is beat up, has a black eye, and having a discussion about what happened with his parents. And the parents sit there and they say, you know, we're really proud of you for not hitting back. You know, it takes a lot of courage to do the right thing. And yet, ever so subtle, he can detect in them their disappointment. That even though he followed their demand, he didn't hit back, he can detect that they wish he had. And so there's this split. Like, you're telling me to do this, but what do you really want from me? This is the moment of K-void. And it's an Italian question, and it means, you're telling me this, but what do you really want from me? Right? And this is a confrontation with the other's desire, their enigmatic desire, right? They tell you what they want from you, you give them that, and they're disappointed. And so now you're left in this anxiety-provoking situation where you can go, okay, they tell me what they want, but damn it, like I gave them that, and now they're disappointed. What the hell am I supposed to do? What do they really expect or want from me? So the next day, the kid goes to school. He decides to punch the kid back, right? So he goes home. Yes, you broke our rule. We don't hit. And so you're grounded for a week. And yet he can detect their happiness. He can detect that they're glad that he hit the bully back. And so this is what Lacan is getting at, and what he sees all the time in the clinic, is that there is this split between what people say they want from you and what they actually want from you. And they're not themselves, they're not aware of it. They're not cognizant of it, where they themselves can't flesh all this out for you. But this crack, this gap between demand and desire, this does not only apply just to interpersonal relationships. This is the same with ideology itself, right? And this is why, whether it's from the military or whether it's from capital, is at your work, right? Or whether it's at college, these institutions will tell you what they want from you. And yet you're also supposed to be subtle enough to realize, yeah, this is what we're telling you, but that's not really what we want. You know, what we really want, you kind of have to figure out and you have to interpret for yourself, but you better get it right. But this is why every ideological interpolation ultimately fails, is because most of us at least, do not actually take the demand at face value. Like, that's all there is to it. We all know that, you know, the military, we are going to proudly defend our nation. Yeah. Well, if you're in the military, you also know about all of the kind of shit behind the scenes. This is what Zizek talks about as the obscene underside of a law, right? Like, there's the official law of, like, the explicit rules that a social order operates by. But to truly be a member of that group, you have to know how to break those rules. You have to know how to enjoy in spite of those rules. And yet there's very specific forms of transgression that are acceptable. Other forms of transgression, not acceptable at all, and you'll be kicked out of the group. But this is part of what it's like, whether you're dealing with an individual person or whether you're dealing with a social institution, is that there's always a split between demand and desire. And that's why ideological interpolation can never fully get us, because it itself is not to be taken at face value. There's an unspoken, unnameable, enigmatic underside to it that you're supposed to interpret for yourself on like a gut level and be able to understand and navigate, and yet it remains unspoken. And so this is why ideologies never fully capture us, right? They capture us in a certain way. That's right. Like, we do feel like we have to live up to their demands on some level, but we also know that there's more than just the demands themselves.
So you're saying that ideological interpolation, like Althusser would say, ideological interpolation determines us in this way that kind of like does away with anything like free will. Whereas what's actually happening is that there is this gap between demand and desire, between what is said, between what is meant, or what's not said, and that we're aware of that on some level. And that awareness of that is what kind of keeps us unglued from
it's
that
the space of freedom, so to speak.
From that interpolation, that ideological interpolation.
That's a certain space of freedom. We're not all the way the ideological subjects of the system. And this is why I believe it's the 4th chapter in Sublime Object of Ideology is the subject of the real, which is to say, like, okay, yeah, consciously we can identify with the demands that, you know, an ideological system puts on us, but there's always a remainder. There's this, like, okay, you tell me this, but then there's the part of me, which we could call the unconscious subject. I'm always interpreting this unconscious dimension of the ideology. I'm always or the institution, right? Like, there's a part of me that escapes symbolic social identification with my society. And there's also a side of society that escapes its official identity too. And so this is where a certain freedom and a certain even friction against ideology at the conscious level can occur. So, I mean, okay, we've done a lot here. There's still a whole lot to say about desire, but
I mean, yeah, you wrote like you wrote like an hour and 20 minutes more about desire, but like I think it definitely helps to see it applied. So
well, that's the thing, right? Like,
I need to leave here by 9:30 to go pick up Anne.
Okay.
So it's like 8:38 here. So that gives us about 50 minutes to close this thing out. So I mean,
let's talk about Squid Game.
Okay, I'm gonna mute because I got to step away just for a second, but I've got my headphones on and I'm here for it. So let's dive in.
Okay, so we'll just run down the basics here. Again, you know, if you want a more nuanced understanding, you can check out the blog post. One thing that really jumped out at me was it was towards the end of the show, and we have 3 main characters. We have Gi-hoon, we have Sae-byeok, and we have Song-woo. And what registered with me about these 3 is that the moment where they actually have a kind of moment in which they speak their actual desire, right? All 3 of them show that their desire is the desire of the other. So in the case of Gi-hoon and Sae-byeok, you remember the scene, I know some of you haven't seen it, but most of you will remember, where they're sitting on a bed with each other discussing teaming up against the psychopathic Song-woo, who is Gi-hoon's childhood friend. Sae-byeok and Gi-hoon are discussing teaming up, and they start talking to each other about what they would do if either one won the prize money. And what we learn in this moment is that Sae-byeok's desire to win the prize money really is just a desire for her mother and brother's desire. So it turns out she's a North Korean defector, escaped from North Korea, came to South Korea in the hopes of being able to build a good life for her mother and brother. Hasn't turned out well for her. And so this is eventually what lured her into being in the game. So she talks about how her mother is stuck in North Korea, and she would get her mother out if she had the money. So of course, so her mother could have her desire realized, and her younger brother is currently stuck in a orphanage, and she would rescue her brother from the orphanage and satisfy his desire, make him happy to the best of her ability. And so you see here that her desire is fundamentally the desire of the other. Same goes for Gihun. Gihun wants to, um, make his mom happy, give his mom a better life. He has a very strained relationship with his daughter. That's only getting worse. And so he thinks that if he wins the prize money and he can become a respectable guy, he will have made his daughter and his mother proud, which is ultimately how he interprets their desire. And even with the the murderous Song Woo, Gi-han's childhood friend, what we learn is Gi-hoon is, or after Gi-hoon has won the game and or at least positioned himself to be able to be the winner of the game before actually claiming victory, he goes over to the defeated Song Woo and he says, "Look, man, like we both can leave here alive. Let's form a majority like we did earlier in the game. If you and I form a majority, we can end the game right here." And Song Woo, he realizes that if he does this, that neither one of them will walk away with the prize money. So Song Woo stabs himself in the throat with a knife. But before he dies, he basically tells Gi-hoon to go help his mom, right? So even Song Woo, who seems incredibly egotistical and self-centered, he's ultimately in this for his mother's desire.
What
And so,
one of Anne's questions was, was Song Woo motivated to fix things for his mom the whole time, or was that redemption at the end because he was really kind of just screwing her over? I mean, and maybe
well, I mean, that's a good
ask.
question.
Let me know if I got that right, Anne. But I think that's what the question was.
Well, here's the thing: the show doesn't let us know either way, and I mean that's part of. I mean that's part of why I like the show is there's these moments where desire is enigmatic, which is precisely how desire is in real life, and yet most pop entertainment, that's what makes a character tropey or just like a caricature of a human being is that they don't have anything enigmatic. They don't have any kind of conflict or tension between their conscious, unconscious. They're one dimensional, which human beings aren't. And so maybe at the end he felt that way. I don't know. I just know that his final thing that he's saying, it's not self-centered. It's ultimately a concern for his mother's desire. And so I mean, the way I read, I think that kind of is an expression of his desire that he ultimately was in it for, his mother's desire. But maybe I'm wrong.
Hmm.
I don't know if there's another season, if they'll go into that. I think his arc is pretty much finished, but
Probably.
yeah. So, but no, I think the three characters in particular, the three main characters, I think they're all embodiments of how desire is the desire of the other.
Okay. And so, what about the front man? Let's get into the front man.
Okay, the
So
front man. This
we
one,
haven't explained to people about the front man. Why don't you? Who is he?
I just want to say one thing I left out of this discussion of the three characters and desire of the other. I do think this is important, right? Because we've talked about objet. Well, on the one hand, objet is the cause of desire. On the other, desire is always the desire of the other. Now, if my desire is the desire of the other, isn't the other's desire the cause of my desire? Well, this is how we square this circle. Possible remainder of myself that I'm always in pursuit of unconsciously. But at the same time, for me to get that relies on my interpretation of the other's desire, because ultimately, for me to have full enjoyment, it means the other have full enjoyment. And this goes back to this symbiotic relationship between the child and the thing, the primary caregiver, right? Because the whole point of that relationship was the child, at least retroactively, however we want to talk about it, takes that, like, not only were they perfectly satisfied in the relationship, so was the other. So for me to get that full enjoyment that I take myself to have lost, it also means the full enjoyment of the other. And so there's
and
always,
this is supposed to be happening unconsciously.
Right. Yeah. That's, I mean, yes.
Okay.
So here's the thing: the glowing prize money, right? All the gold glowing piggy bank.
Right.
What makes that so radiant is precisely because the contestants interpret the other's desire to desire all the money, right? Like, money in and of itself is not desirable at all. It's just paper. I mean,
right.
You think about certain tribes that are secluded from the world. If you throw money at them, they don't care. It means nothing. Like, it's not part of their world. There's nothing desirous about it whatsoever. It's only in how the other always already desires money. That's what causes us to desire money. And so that, for Lacan, when
unless you
OJ
like literally are broke, and you just don't have anything, which is why when you were first watching this, you were like, I don't know if it's that Lacanian, because these people, I mean, it's kind of like a hard, this isn't like the best way to, you were talking about jouissance though, but you're like, I don't even know if it really applies to some of these characters just in desperate situations, and so it's like,
here's the thing, and this is the great insight of psychoanalysis. Simply maintaining your biological existence is not what it means to be alive as a human being. You have to have that surplus of enjoyment. There has to be forms of enjoyment that you have. And I'm not saying these are even the perfect forms. I'm just talking about, like, the average. The term we would use is partial jouissance, partial enjoyment, which is to say it's just the average everyday enjoyment you actually get that is not necessary. Right? You don't have to have it biologically speaking, but you have to have it to function as the subject you are. Right? And so the whole thing of, they're desperate. Yeah. But here's the thing. Nobody just wants the basic necessities required for biological existence. Animals do that. Humans don't. For us to be alive in any meaningful sense of the term requires us to have access to a surplus of enjoyment. And whether that means, like, you have enough money to, like, waste some of it, or you have enough time to bullshit, and you don't have to always be punching the clock where you can do nothing, right? There's all types of forms of excess that you can make your own, but whatever they are, whether they're overeating, whether they're smoking cigarettes, whatever it is that you do that is basically bad for you, yet nonetheless you need that to even function as a subject. And so that's where I would go with that. It's just like, no human just wants actual biological reproduction. Like, I mean, not in the sense of sex, but in the sense of just having the necessary requirements to maintain your biological existence. That is not enough for us. And that's what makes us different.
Yeah, if we could just have our food and drink through, like, feeding tubes into our back from a backpack, and we just never see or think about it, like, we're always nourished. The point is like, we would not like that situations, or at least that's what this is arguing.
Well, yeah,
or is that what you're saying?
Psychoanalysis would say it's just simple that human beings don't have instincts; we have drives. And that drives are geared towards excessive enjoyment for their own sake. Like, if you go to Red Lobster, you're not going there just to, like, meet biological necessities. You're going there because you like to stuff your face on cheese biscuits. Like, right? There's an enjoyment aspect to
I
it. Like if
you've made me crave something I've never had because you talk about these cheese
well,
biscuits so much.
that's because I'm a good old fashioned American consumer. And back in the 90s, here I go with my nostalgia. There's nothing better in the world than a good Red Lobster cheese biscuit. Now trying to get one that's even remotely decent, you feel like you won the fucking lottery if you got a decent one now. But
Oh no.
yeah, it's just I'm really talking about myself whenever I reference the cheese biscuits.
Well, you know,
But
we got to use examples that we can relate to. It's like whenever I'm talking
well,
about
and that's
time
the thing, right?
energy,
Like
and whenever I'm talking about time energy, and I use the violin example, it's literally something I've always wanted is to
mhm.
be able to just play anything on the violin. But you know how much time energy that would take. No, it's
Oh,
not
wow.
happening. And so it's like that. It is my example, even though I never say that. But you know, it's the same thing with your cheese biscuit. So
So I mean, look, this is, and again, you and I, we both take this approach. We actually want to be as accessible as possible. Now, the more I get into Lacanian theory, I know, like, I find myself being guilty of this, where I'm like, God, I used to be clearer when I would talk about it. But the problem is, the more theory you get, it ends up being like when you talk about it, you just smash it all together. Because if you try to lay it out where every moment of it, every piece of it is crystal clear, then that's why I end up writing 2 hour long blog posts. Like,
right,
right. And
right,
that's the thing where for us to go step by step, I mean, first off, if the blog post is 2 hours, you and I would probably need 6 to actually
yep,
flesh it all out, because of course
right.
we're going to do our, we're going to sidetrack and talk about other things and free associate in a conversation. And so
No,
I don't,
people
that's
will
the
have to
thing.
just read the post if they really want. But yeah, but
Part of it is like, and you know this, like any of these great thinkers that we love, it really is a conceptual tapestry. Like it's a sprawling network of concepts, and the only way to get it is like what you said with like the violin. It takes a lot of time and energy to get it, and
oh yeah,
so every introduction to it is a phase. People can get what's interesting about it or what's important about it, and then they can go on if they want to, right? Maybe they say,
right.
this ain't for me, whatever, right? I'm not interested. But that's the point of an introduction, really,
Well,
is
that was
just
like the guy who was like, "Oh, you didn't go into jouissance very much," and it's like, "Oh my god,
yeah, but it's like I
that's
talk about it in other posts, and like
that's literally another post." So it's just like, yeah, we one thing at a time. So yeah,
exactly.
so we're the front man. We got to get into this front man. So
Okay, so real quick, here's the whole point. All I'm saying is that whatever objet petit a, whatever the impossible object, the cause of desire, gets connected to a physical object, a real object, it's like that physical object now has a sublime status, right? It's like it's positioned in that empty spot of the original thing, right? Like
okay,
it like that is what sublimation is for Lacan. When you hear sublimation in psychoanalysis, you think like, oh, there's this primary form of sexual enjoyment that human beings have. They can't engage in that all the time, so they take that sexual energy and redirect it and channel it into another activity. So whether it be studying philosophy or whether it be playing a musical instrument or doing ballet, whatever it is, that's how you redirect your primordial sexual energy. That's not how it works for Lacan. He doesn't think that there's some sort of pure human sexuality. He even says like, I can get as much enjoyment from talking as I can from fucking. uh that's the whole point of us having drives, is that there is no there is no definitional default sexual enjoyment for human beings. That's why sexual enjoyment is all over the place for human beings in a way that it's not for animals. And that's the thing. Like human sexuality by definition doesn't have a fixed object. It doesn't have a fixed goal. And that is what Freud got at early on with his 3 essays on early childhood sexual development, whatever. Sexuality doesn't have fixed essential objects or goals. It's just, it's freed up in a way from nature that like sexual instinct in animals is not.
yeah,
And so drive is his name for this kind of human
like
sexuality.
having a specific kind of fetish or always
Exactly.
wanting these cheese biscuits, or for me it's like a burrito. I always want a burrito. And Anne really loves like Ethiopian food. It's like there's like all kinds of ways that we could just go to the grocery store and eat lentils and peppers, but it's like I spend all this time thinking about burritos. You know,
Right.
is that kind of what we're getting at?
Well, think about like the weird sexual enjoyment you get from eating at, like, I like eating at restaurants. Like, the being at the restaurants not essential to my biological existence, but
Right.
part of the enjoyment in eating is being at a restaurant. So this is where you get into this whole thing. Like, Zizek's great on this, where like human sexuality always has to be take part within like a phantasmatic framing. Like, we always have sexual enjoyment through some sort of fantasy frame, and like sex without a phantasmatic component is traumatic. Like, this is why human beings, like you have certain types of people you're attracted to and so on and so forth, is because they have to fit your phantasmatic coordinates for you to even want to have a relationship with them.
So
And
when a person lights up in that way, where it's like,
that's objet, right? Like,
yeah,
they've entered your fantasy space, and they've become positioned in that sublime spot. And of course, things can go wrong here too. They
yeah,
can Desublimation can happen, where
they
they
don't
go
like
from being the sublime object to being shit. Like, you can't even stand to look at them.
right,
But
yeah.
but here's my only point is this.
But
Look,
also, desire and love are not the same thing, and you do get
no,
into
and
that
that's
in
a
your
whole nother thing. Like, that's in
you
the
do get
post.
into that in your post,
That's a
yeah.
whole thing. Like,
A
love is when you
love
actually
corrects for
embrace.
desire.
Well, like, yeah. So there's something violent about desire. Desire desires partially, and what it means is, like, it desires features. It desires certain tones of voice. It desires certain ways a person dresses, right? Like, it desires parts. And what love is, love embraces the person in their totality, right? Love loves their being. It loves them as a whole. And desire really is, it is a certain kind of, Lacan would even say that desire is kind of a fetishist in and of itself, precisely because it fixates on certain features. And, you know, like, you can take, I mean, even guys who are big into cars, a lot of them have, like, they have to have the same color car, or they have to have the same brand, or whatever. Like, they like only want Mercedes or whatever. And so
See, and
this
like this is like, it gets into a whole other dimension of consumerism that I didn't ever really know. I've only really known people who, like, I mean, really, like, grew up around people who they drove vehicles that were what they could afford, and never was it something that, well, it's like my car that just broke down 3 weeks ago. Like, it's like, God, I don't give a fuck what it looks like. I want something reliable. I just literally want something necessary.
But you say
I
that when it's broken down, right? Because the point is, you still have to get to work. You still have to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I
But
just need it.
that's the whole point, right? Of course, when human beings don't have access to the basic things they need to live, of course they want those met. The point is, once you have those met, then it's time for desire to really flourish and get
Yeah,
the shit that you don't need.
right.
Right?
That's when desire takes
There's
off.
nothing
And
more depressing. Like, as a kid who grew up at the mall, there's nothing more depressing than going to the mall and only buying the thing you need. I don't want to go to the mall and buy the thing I need. I want to go to the mall and buy the thing I want. And then
wow.
of course, I'm disappointed because I didn't get something else. But that is how it worked. And so, yeah, I do think he's right that our enjoyment and our desire are excess oriented. That it's part of being human to desire, like, your actual enjoyment, what makes life worth living. He even says, like, without jouissance, life would not be worth living. Like, it's what makes life meaningful for us are those forms of enjoyment that are not reducible just to meeting biological criteria.
So
So hold on. I want to make this point real quick
get it.
before we move on, because I know
Yeah.
we're running out of time. So the piggy bank, why is it glowing gold? Why is it in the sublime position? Precisely because they all interpret, I mean, at least our three main characters, right? they all interpret that that's the object of the other's desire, that if they get that, they'll satisfy the other's desire. And so the other's desire is what's making that sublime, right? Okay, so the desire of the man. Or you want to say something?
No, I thought you were. I thought that was it. So
no, that's it on that. So okay, so with the first three characters, we see how desire is the desire of the other. Then I go on and say, well, why is the front man important? Well, he's the guy who actually owns the Lacan book, right? So if he's the character that owns the Lacan book, I'm like, okay, well, there has to be something interesting there. I think there is, because if anybody in the show really exemplifies the enigmatic aspect of desire, it's the front man himself. I say that because, one, we got to remember, this is a guy who what does he desire as a result of all this? He desires to be the guy who takes over the games and runs them. How weird and unpredictable is his desire there, right? It's almost unfathomable to us, where we think that somebody who went through all this suffering would desire to take this on as their life project, to perpetuate it, continue it. And so I think that's we don't learn much about him. We know he had a Lacan book, and that he now is he's the main guy running the show, especially after the old man dies at the end. He's the guy running the show, and I think even his outfit is a perfect imagistic representation of desire. The black face, the black hood, like he's a pure mystery man, right? And so I think that's why he had the Lacan book. I think he gets at the fundamental aspect of desire that Lacan is always going back to, which is it's inexhaustible, it's unnameable, it's unpredictable, it's elusive, right? I think he's just a pure embodiment of desire as Lacan conceptualizes it.
Like, maybe he just really got into the game and actually found out something about himself, and he was like, this is actually meaningful, and I've never experienced anything meaningful before. And now he's in the same way that a serial killer might find killing meaningful now. And so he's like, fuck, I just want to do that. All this money is meaningless.
Yeah, and again, that's it. He maybe he found, like, oh, it showed me something about myself I didn't know, that under other circumstances I never would have discovered, right? I mean, but again, for us as the viewer, I mean, it does put us in that anxiety-provoking position that Lacan calls the K-void, which is, okay, it literally means, like, you're telling me this, but what do you really want? But K-void also can just mean, like, the mystery of desire. Like, what the hell is going on with this person?
Okay. Yeah, and I think that Mercurius Bathus in the chat, I hope I got the name pronunciation right, gave a really good first jab here at a basic rundown on what's going on in their own words. Can you see it?
Oh, let me look.
Yeah, they said the players have structurally sublimated desires, mostly for coherent family relations, and they are confined to selfish, cathartic extremes. What do you think about that?
I'm
glad we're doing this as a live stream, by the way.
I'm honestly, folks, I'm not sure, because again, like that, this is where you get into this whole thing. Like, I'm not sure what sublimated means here. Like, there's a lot that's said right there that could be unpacked, right? Like, there's a lot going on in that statement.
They're definitely confined to selfish, cathartic extremes. As far as the players are structurally sublimated desires, mostly for coherent family relations, I would say, except that, I don't know, with Jiyoung, the main character, he went in the beginning, like, he had this death drive problem. That was like, he wasn't happy with just trying to build up and better his relationship with his daughter or with his mother, or just try to help his mother. He was instead, like, trying to get his mom to give him money that she didn't have, so he could go to the horses. And then it shows a montage of him really on edge, all of his intensity, just excited and like crying and laughing, and or like, you know, losing at the races, right? And like the most extreme kind of enjoyment. Like I don't experience that. Like, you know, I don't get to just go around like that, right? Like my life is like pretty restrained in comparison to that most of the time, I would say. You know, so like he's kind of he's addicted to this thing. And it turns out that he's got a trauma he's nursing from a strike when some of his coworkers were killed because they were doing a strike. And maybe that's a part of it. But the thing is when he's gambling, he might tell you that he's doing it all so that he can make his daughter happy and make his mom happy and get them all the things that they want. But that's not it for him. So in some of these cases, like the girl who ran away from North Korea, maybe for her, like I think like she's just like trying to survive. And actually, but Ji Young's structure of desire already had him ruining his life so that he could risk it all, literally stealing from his mom so that he could risk it all while gambling, so that it rationalized in his head. It's ultimately to like be, get her approval and like buy her a nice house. But it's not really about that. Is it?
No, what he's fallen. And again, I've thought about this, and I'd like to develop this at some point. But no, what he's really doing, he's fallen the superegoic demand to enjoy. Like this is where there's this connection, and I mean this will take us too far off the track, but
right.
There is a key connection between there's drive in and of itself, and then there's how the superego modifies drive in Freudian and Lacanian theory, and that's a whole other discussion. But it is really this drive that like he has to repeat this form of enjoyment that involves him undermining himself, that involves him losing, right? He enjoys the loss itself. And this is what is part of death drive, where you get an enjoyment from sabotaging your basic pleasure, your basic security, basic safety, basic stability. And what we see in him is, like you've said, it is death drive operating.
Cool. Yeah. So I think, but yeah, Mercurius, it's a good, but that's my big qualifier is that it's, they have these structure. I don't know what sublimated means in this context exactly, because I know Lacan's not quite using that word, but they've got these structured desires. Yes. And and then when you say mostly for coherent family relations, that's going to be with every one of them, it is ultimately for the other, but it's like, in what way? And in a lot of ways, it's not ways that are realistic or actually satisfiable in the case of like Ji Young, for instance. And then there's the question of like Song Woo, and like, did he really want to have coherent family relations? Is he had like risked everything to the point of, well, now his mother was going to have her house taken away from her. And did he really feel bad about that? Or did he just want more of whatever you want to say money. Well, how much money? I don't know. Like, but this guy's got a problem. Like, this guy's he's kind of a sociopath. Like, the fact that he was doing some kind of like Wall Street trading or something, but that he like somehow like borrowed money and like put his mom's house against it and didn't even tell her that he was doing that. And then he ends up being the person who, in the little friend group, ends up being the first one to start turning against everybody, which was totally fucked, which was some of like the most difficult parts of the show. But Michael, like one of the most, you say in the post, one of the most important parts is, I don't know their names.
Ji Young, the girl who makes the sacrifice.
Her name is Ji Young?
Yeah, Ji Young.
I've been saying that, haven't I? But I was saying the main character's name, I thought.
No, that's Gi Hoon.
Gi Hoon, okay.
Like we were talking about pronunciations, like yeah, I'm probably butchering these names.
Yeah, sorry everybody.
Yeah. No, Ji Young is the girl who is on the team with Sabiak in the marbles game.
So yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, I think a lot of us would agree this is probably the best part in the show, at least the most moving. And what we have here is what Lacan. I mean, it's referred to as the ethical act or just the act, but Lacan in Seminar 7, he talks about the ethics of psychoanalysis. And part of what psychoanalysis seeks to do is the psychoanalyst seeks desire, right? Where they can actually claim what their desire is for themselves. Again, it's not that you end up with some pure desire that springs forth from your singularity. Of course, this desire can still be shaped by the other. But the difference is it's not like you're just caught in this web of this other desires this and this other desires that. And I'm not sure. It's where you basically choose your desire. Even if it's the desire of the other, it's where you claim your desire for yourself. And
Okay.
This is what we see with Ji Young. And what desire she claimed, and this often involves a sacrifice, like taking a stand for your desire, not compromising your desire often requires a sacrifice. And for Lacan, his great example of this is Antigone from Sophocles' play. And Antigone, traitor, and King Creon, Antigone's king, he's basically saying, look, Polynices is a traitor. We're not going to give him a proper burial, which Antigone just loses it. And she's like, no, you're going to bury my brother. I don't care. And this basically ends up leading to her being symbolically killed. Like she goes into a symbolic death. And what this means is like, it's where you die in the eyes of your society. Like and we would think about it as being stripped of our citizenhood, right? Citizenship. And for her, it's like her society has basically turned its back and said, I don't recognize you as one of us. So she undergoes a symbolic death. She's then put in prison. She eventually hangs herself. And so she literally dies. But the point is, for her to make this ethical act, she had to be willing to go outside of the symbolic, right? Okay. She had to be able to say, you know what? I'm not compromising my desire. You're going to bury my brother. And whatever the consequences are, I don't care. I'm demanding you bury my brother. And this is what we see with Ji Young, right? Okay. Throughout this game in the marbles, right? Her and Sabiak start, you know, in Baudrillardian terms, they're symbolically exchanging in the sense that they're entering into like a personal relationship with each other through exchanging details about their lives they've never told anybody else. And once Ji Young hears Sabiak's story, hears how she desires to satisfy the desire of her brother and her mother by, you know, freeing them from their oppressive situations, Ji Young claims Sabiak's desire for herself. And she says, you know what? I know very well that I am going to sacrifice myself so Sabiak has a chance to win this game and free her mother and brother, which is in Lacanian terms to satisfy their desire or, you know, for the sake of their desire. And she ends up sacrificing herself for the other's desire, but she makes this ethical claim. And so here's the thing. If she hadn't done this, if she hadn't thrown down her marble and purposely lost the game with Sabiak, then they just would have killed her. She never would have undergone a symbolic death. Like, it's the very fact that she killed herself as a participant in this game that she enters this space between the two deaths. Like, she kills her symbolic self, at least within the game, and yet she's not literally dead yet. And right. Yet that sacrifice is precisely what makes her, take a stand for her ethics of her desire, right? Which again, her desire is Sabiak's desire in this case, but she claims it as her own. And this is what makes her an ethical hero, is that she knows she's going to die, but nonetheless, she sacrifices her symbolic self for her her identity as a participant in order to, for the sake of the other's desire.
Hands up in chat if you cried for that.
Yeah, it was a really powerful scene.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing. So there's another aspect of this thing about the ethical act, and Zizek's always quick to emphasize this, that something happens here with the ethical act. It's not merely that she sacrifices herself because she's unwilling to compromise her desire. It's also the fact that this act has a it retroactively changes the structure of the game. So the game is positioned as like everyone against everyone else. There can only be one winner. So everyone is essentially like, the idea of a selfless sacrifice within this situation seems impossible. Right?
Right.
And the very fact that Sabiak was willing, or I'm sorry, that Ji-young was willing to sacrifice herself for Sabiak shows that it's actually possible within this structure to be selfless. And so this idea of a purely individual narcissistic game where you're out for yourself, it changes the very nature of the game retroactively. Like, yes, and sacrifice can be opened up within the most selfish of scenarios.
And
so that's that. I definitely wanted to touch on Ji-young because she's almost the hero of
in the time that we have left here, we can't get too much, honestly, into it. Yeah. But someone did say, they said, hot take: the rich people getting the rich people betting on poor people's death trope just obscures the systemic character of capitalism. And I wanted to say, the whole thing, if I don't think that you can get a systemic critique of capitalism out of this. So that it definitely is not, if that's all people, if people's only understanding of capitalism critique is watching movies like Parasite and watching shows like Squid Game, then it's, well, you don't like inequality. That's not exactly the same thing as understanding capitalism structurally. And so, yeah, that's a good point. And it's like, okay, so, but this is more of just like, yeah, this is about desire in capitalism. And desire in capitalism means, for instance, that you have a class of people who own everything, can basically do anything. They're basically gods. They're richer than any kings in history. And they can't be satisfied even though they just keep trying to get more and more and more. They just can't be satisfied. They will keep trying to get more and more and more, and they will never be satisfied. And we need to cut them off. We need to say, hey, limits. Hey,
yeah.
Slow down. Some of us don't get to eat.
You can still have your excess as a human being without it being this level of excess. No one should have this level of excess. And so what you can say is that it has a kind of it has a larval dimension of a critique of capitalism itself, because what it's critiquing is, this is what unrestrained accumulation gets you. It is a critique of the ideology, like, the more you accumulate, the better you feel, the better you have it. Like, these people are so miserable. I mean, Ilnam, the old man, I mean, he says this to Gi-hun. They're all so bored and miserable with their fucking wealth that they had to resort to this. Like, if this is like how shitty, if your life is so shitty, you have to resort to watching other people die in a spectacle like this, then you're not in a good spot. And so it is a critique of the highest position that capitalist society offers. And so my way of describing this is, and the crisis that all the VIPs are in.
Right.
So, I put, the desire of Gi-hun, the desire of so on. So, like, when I talk about the VIPs, I put desire in quotes, because the whole point is that desire is motivated by not getting what it wants, by there being obstacles in its way, right? Well, when you have this amount of obscene wealth, there's nothing you can't possess, like in the drop of a dime. Like, you can have whatever you want whenever you want it. It actually makes it an obstacle to desire itself. Like, if desire requires obstacles, then obscene wealth is an obstacle to the obstacle. Like, it makes you not able to actually desire like the rest of us. And so this is part of what leads them down this fucked up path. It's precisely because their desire can't function like the rest of, like, there's nothing they can't have. And so the only thing they can't have is, all right, well, let's have a bunch of people, we'll get people and they'll all kill each other, right? Like, okay, that's not attainable in the snap of a finger, but they ultimately still get it. So the point is, right, is that capitalism acts like that being at the highest level of this society and having the most in terms of accumulation, like the more you accumulate, the happier you are. And the show is emphatically saying that is not the case.
Yeah, and something else you say in that section of the blog post is that a lot of people have complaints about the bad lines and the bad acting on the part of the Americans here, but that's actually perfect because the director refuses to put them in a position where they're sexy, like in Wolf of Wall Street.
Or just Wall Street, Oliver Stone's great movie. So Gordon Gekko was kind of the Jordan Belfort in the 80s. Like the famous line, like, greed is good. This is from the movie Wall Street. But here's the thing, right? In Hollywood, even if they make a film that is seeking to be a critique of capitalism, it always ends up glamorizing it. Like, even if it's trying to say capitalism is negative, it can't resist it. It's like there's too much of an American enjoyment we get from these figures because as Americans, like, we all secretly desire this kind of the lifestyles of the rich and famous shit. And it's part of our fantasy structure. And it goes so deep that it's like, even when you try to critique it, they end up glamorizing it. Well, what I liked about Squid Game is that the VIP, there's nothing enviable about them. Nobody sees them and goes, God, I want to be like them. Whereas if you watch Wolf of Wall Street, there's moments you're like, yeah, I want some of the obscene, excessive enjoyment that Jordan Belfort has. And so I actually
wait, are you getting the actor's name right here? Isn't it Nick DiCaprio?
Yeah, but the character is Jordan Belfort.
That
was the real guy he was depicting.
Okay. He's a real guy. Okay.
Yeah. No,
so
no.
And yeah, I wanted to. So in the chat, Project 5 a.m. said we should get back to this old man and the object petty A before we close out. Since he built the game for shits and giggles, or wait, were you saying that we were back to the old man because we were talking about the rich people now? You might have been saying that, but Anne was like, and then the old man goes on to say there is no good in humanity when 456 actually was good and cared about others. And then Project 5 a.m. added 456, the main character, didn't kill anyone to win the game. And that is a victory unto its own self, right? He was good to the people around him, to his team. He really did try his best, and it makes him into it's redeeming in a way, he was a good guy who was addicted to something, but like the fact is like there was like this shred of his humanity he had to like retained, whereas a lot of the people that were in there, they didn't really have it. Like the moment lights were out and they realized they weren't going to be killed or punished if they killed other people they were competing against, it was just like people just started going after one another and killing each other. And, there were people who were like, oh, I don't have to do this. Kind of like the people at the end of Midnight Mass there, Michael, when they were like, actually, I don't have to, which is just like really, really cool moment. The fact that, their team didn't have to. But then you have the guy who turns against Ali. So at the saddest part of the show, with this whole thing between these two girls going on, where the one sacrifices her life for the other so she can get back to her family, it keeps going. It's alternating between scenes with number 1 and 456. And obviously number 1 can't really die, and so and that there's this whole other thing there. But the main thing that's happening right then is that Ali is being betrayed and lied to and tricked by.
And you see the contrast, right? You see the contrast between the ethical act and then the totally narcissistic one.
Yeah, Song Woo was a totally narcissistic one, whereas the main 456 main character, he he's trying. He kind of starts lying to number one, but like number one really played up his brain tumor, and so at this point, 456 is like, well, you
Well, should
know,
I? If the guy's, you know, yeah, you get where he's coming from.
right? So he tricks him.
What's good, right? There's tension here.
Right.
You understand, but you don't condone. Like it's a, you know.
Yeah. So he's tricking. So yeah, you've got the contrast between these extremes, and then you've got this situation where he's kind of the old man, the guy who created the game, who's like undercover in the game, number one. He's pretending that he's kind of forgetting what is even going on in the game. He keeps acting like he's going back to his childhood, but in reality, he's kind of signaling, I'm too far gone, and so he lets him take advantage of him, so that number 456 can win and leave. And then there's a gunshot after he leaves, so he thinks the old man's dead, but obviously the old man's not dead. But in that moment, that's probably the rawest, realest moment of the whole show. You know, he got to have like this sick kind of twisted fun playing in these child games blown up to adult size or even larger than that. And you know, he's had fun playing some of these games because you can see him smiling while he's playing these childhood games that are actually resulting in people getting shot all around him, which is just like a real sick thing he's already doing. But then in this moment, he actually gets to have like this heart to heart, like real crazy moment, because like obviously 456 is like really devastated that he thinks number one is going to die. And so number one is getting to live on this extreme like that, but he knows that it's all kind of made up, but it doesn't change 456's like emotion, and it doesn't change like he still gets, it's kind of like he's paying for sex or something like that. Like he's still getting to experience something raw and real, even though he knows it's not real. But 456 doesn't know it's real, and that's why it gets to feel real for him, the guy who made the game.
For me, I think that I mean, I guess we got to close out here. I would say that, and I make this point in the post, right? I think the secret that makes Ilnam different than the other capitalists, the other VIPs, is that he was able to construct a new fundamental fantasy, right? And what is that fantasy? It's his fantasy of actually being a kid again. And this actually reconstitutes for him an obstacle to his desire. You can't ever be a kid again. But this is part of where it provides a certain enjoyment, because now you're at least in pursuit of something. One of the key things here in understanding Lacan, and I think McGowan's really good at pointing this out, so is Zizek, but we get enjoyment from not getting what we want. I know how weird that sounds, right? How paradox. But the point is, you know that if you get what you think you want, you're dissatisfied. It's actually in not getting what you want that you actually can get some enjoyment. And he's able to enjoy again precisely because what he's constituted as his ultimate fantasy, which is enjoying like a child, he can't ever actually have again. And it's precisely because he has this obstacle, this limit to what he can actually have, that he's able to have any enjoyment whatsoever. And so the reason he was able to enjoy himself is, unlike the other capitalists, he constructed a fantasy of an object that's impossible to attain.
Mercurius says player one selects players for their maladaptive tendencies to affirm his dismal view of human nature and validate his manipulative scheme for recognition from the international elite. Total fantasy. Damn. I mean, he is, in a sense, like what I mean, that's I hadn't thought about the fact that while he's playing in the game, they're watching him play in the game, and he's the one who organized this, and he's like their sort of friend, or he's the one who's providing the service to them, and so him being in it, he's aware that they're watching him. So there's this other kind of weird.
That's a great insight.
Yeah, that's really on the nose. Nailed it. That's interesting. I'm gonna have to think of
right, because that's a way for him to stand out apart from them, right? Like,
yeah, exactly, because they're safe in their, and he's like, oh, they won't even be able to really enjoy this. He's like, I'm going in.
That's a really good insight.
Yeah, that's a good one. A really good one, Project 5 a.m. asks here was the tug of war game rigged because the old man was involved? And Anne was like, that's a good question. And I'm like, yeah, that's a really good question because that's pretty fucking crazily risky, right? Like, or was
Right.
he?
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
Well,
and they
think about
all
it, we've seen there's certain videos on YouTube where they go through and they're showing how it seems like he had a certain protective layer over him in
right,
the red light green light game. Like somehow the mechanism, the machine knew it was him and wasn't going to shoot around him to like 10 feet or whatever it was. So I've seen videos where it's trying to argue that there's more protection for him going on throughout the game. And yeah, you wonder like how would he have got out of the maybe he did. I mean, it doesn't tell us, but I have trouble believing that he was actually in a position to fall to his death. And I think that's why he shows so much concern during those late night riots within the big prison facility, because I mean, it seems like right then he could have got shanked, right? Somebody could have stabbed
right.
him.
Yeah, and he must have
And so I think his
instantly
concern
climbed
then
up
was
there.
legitimate.
Yeah. His concern. Yeah, so I mean, he is obviously at actual risk, but I mean, he can basically yell to stop it, and the front man will send them in and stop it, like, which did happen with the riot. But dang, yeah, that's a with the see. I don't see how they could have rigged tug of war.
I
But
honestly
but
don't know either.
he did give them the pep talk in the elevator, and they were
Yeah,
like,
and I mean, he's
"Why
the
should we
reason they
listen?"
won that game.
Yeah, they were like, "Why should we listen to you, old man?" And he's just like, "When I was a kid, this is how we'd do it." And then he's just like, he describes like you lock your elbows in, you do this, you do that, you start like bending over backwards. But it was Song Woo who said jump forward, then yank back or whatever that they ended up doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Song Woo ends up saving the day last second there.
I just wonder if we could zoom in, if there's a shot like are his chains actually connected like the other ones are? I don't know.
Okay, everybody. Well, homework assignment. Make sure to like this video. People who didn't watch it today will be watching it tomorrow. Make sure to like it so it pops up for them on their YouTube like timeline or whatever. And also, if you've said stuff in this chat, maybe summarize what you've said or turn it into a question. Maybe come back tomorrow and comment it, because what happens sometimes is we have a couple hundred comments in the live stream, in the live chat, and then the next day there's like no comments. It's like crickets, and it's like, okay, well, let's get some of the, so maybe check in later, everybody, and ask some questions, or maybe as you are watching this show for the first time or rewatching it, making connections, or if you have questions related to this stuff, go ahead and put that in there. Because I was going to say at the beginning of this, we're back by popular demand, because there's a lot of people who, some of the most of my views for any single video on like theory specifically stuff, like by far comes from these conversations I've had with Michael on Lacan mostly. I mean, these are really taken off. They're very popular. And relatively speaking for theory, but I mean, theory is a pretty niche area. So, it's very exciting. And I want to say, I told everybody in the email that I sent out today, make sure to subscribe to me, theorypleeb.com. Just go there. That's where you can subscribe so you can get these updates so I can tell you when stuff's happening. But I said in there that there was going to be a surprise. I said, P.S., there's going to be a surprise. And so I saved it for the end. And I should have been baiting you all along, playing with your desire throughout this thing. But, I didn't think of it. But it's my book. It's right here. This is actually, this is Waypoint. This is my book. It's not out yet. But this is it, and you can actually see there's a gray stripe across the front. It says not for resale. Okay, so this is a proof copy. It was just so I could see what it will look like, and if for final changes. And so final changes are going through, and at the moment the last of the changes are gone through, then I'll announce the 2 weeks from publication through my email. So everyone will have a good warning. And then it'll be 2 weeks out, and there will be a launch event. And there'll be more about that in the email. So stay tuned for that. Michael, anything you want to say before we close this thing out, man?
Yeah, congrats on getting your first book done.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I wouldn't have done it without you pushing me to do it, you know.
Well, like I say, I told you, you write one, you can write another one. So, like I say, this is just the beginning for you.
That's the crazy thing about writing is like, yeah, no, it really does feel. I mean, it actually, and you know, there's a lot of ways. We'll talk about this. I mean, there will be a video where I talk about this stuff, but it's just been I just feel like now it's like like being able to write something like this, then I can kind of hold and like look through it, and then the fact that people will take it more seriously than if I make a video essay. People will be like, they'll read it. People in my life who I already have philosophy conversations with, they will read it, and then we'll talk. And I already have had a lot of these conversations over the last year with proofreaders, and they're just like, you know, it gets you on like a wavelength with your thinking and with your conversations with other people that it just wasn't there before. And so, and then it also, after you've done it once, then you're like, oh, well, hell, there's a million ways I could have done that better. And so it's just like, oh, wow. So this is really exciting. And I can't wait to share it with everybody.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah. All right, everybody. So yeah, make sure to drop those comments on this video later. And if you said something in the chat that I didn't respond to, just comment it in the actual video later. There's a bunch of things that I couldn't get to, but I'd like to eventually like respond to. So that's where to do it. But yeah, thanks for joining, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
This has been really great. Yeah, glad we got it working. Eh? Like that was
yeah.
Geez,
That would have been disappointing.
If I almost thought it was a done, like, oh, this isn't happening with that echo problem, but no,